Andrew, sorry.
That's okay. Andrew Edwards, we're from the Darwin Centre of Bushfire Research. I instigated this, that's why I'm up here introducing the group very quickly. We've been at CDU for about 13 years. Before that, we were with Bushfires NT for a number of years, many years, and we've got a fairly significant body of work that we've produced in all that time, which I'll let Jeremy introduce. But yeah, there's quite a range of talks. I've only got Hafsa. We've got a bunch of PhD students, of course. We've only got Hafsa here today because her work's very sort of topical about smoke and air pollution and so forth. So that's the topic I thought would be very valuable to everybody. But otherwise, we're just sort of going to give you an overview of all the work, all the different projects that we're involved in that you may want to be involved in too. As well as our colleagues at NAFI, Kerry's here. NAFI's a big part of what we do. We're not going to talk about NAFI today too much, except for all the valuable data that it produces and that we all use as well. So I'll give it over to Jeremy to talk about.
Good morning all, and all those online too, and our respects to countrymen everywhere and everybody who looks after managing the country, including some people in this room. I'm a very brief introduction to point out that savannas are the most fire-prone of the Earth's biomes. Probably 90% of all biomass burning takes place in savannas and produces about 70% annually of global biomass emissions. The disparity there is that the peat swamps of Indonesia and so forth have a lot more methane when they actually cook, as opposed to the grassy savannas next slide. And as we all understand, fire regimes in Australia basically run out of Northern Australia and Central Australia sometimes, and every now and again there's a little fire that goes and cooks people's houses, and there's a lot of media attention in the deep south, but at a global level we have the issues involved. And on the right hand side there is just to illustrate one of the main things that we've been engaged with over basically since Kyoto was signed in 1997, is the development of savanna burning emission abatement projects. A quarter of the whole tropical savannas is now under one form of a regulated project or other. And in the years to come, we're going to be moving from emissions abatement to carbon sequestration. And I think Cameron's going to talk a little bit about that. And people are going to introduce themselves to their projects of the time. And Andrew's already mentioned that we actually have a lot of postgraduate students, and we're always interested in people who are doing interesting things. It doesn't have to be necessarily totally related to fire. If you've got something interesting that we might think is interesting, come and talk to us. Thanks.
Hi, my name's James. I used to think a lot about fire mapping, and you're about to hear a bit more about the notion of ecosystem services and payments for ecosystem service mechanisms, and they work best when they're measured well. When you think about emissions abatement, which Jessa just mentioned, we don't run around every year sampling fires, sampling the emissions from every fire. We do it by measuring it properly, and that's been parameterised well in the past, and then we measure the fire instead. And so this is a screenshot from NAFI. This is the fire scar mapping that's used to measure emissions in Northern Australia. But going forward, we're going to start thinking about other ecosystem services in terms of nature and care, and maintaining habitat and biodiversity generally. And of course, in the north, that's also driven a lot by fire, but you can't measure that so well using something that's designed to measure things at a continental or global scale. So we use what we call fine scale mapping or high resolution mapping. It's just a different satellite data, a finer resolution, and it's more appropriate for measuring different ecosystem services. So if you change to the next slide, please. This is an example of a plot up on the Arnhem Land Plateau. This is a sand plain in amongst some fissured sandstone. And you see those green blobs here These are elephant carpenter isolates, closed forest, sensitive ecosystem, sensitive habitat, fire sensitive, and that's does benefit from savanna fires because that mitigates savanna fire management, that mitigates late season fires, but managers in that part of the world also do manage it as a separate activity in the different project. And if you slip to the next slide, this is an example of what's used to measure emissions across the continent. Of course, this is not appropriate for measuring impacts on habitat on a fine scale. Next slide. This is an example of fine scale habitat fire mapping. And you can see that this is much more appropriate in that it detects the little activity happening around the isolates there. You can see the little fine scale early prescribed burning happening there. And this is done through NAFI by the guys at NAFI using a process that's pretty simple, but it's also rigorous in that it involves pretty intense sort of post processing editing to get it nice and tidy. And this sort of product is also sent out to fire managers to use in prescribed burning and wildfire suppression operations as well. So it kind of has to be accurate if we're going to take it out off the ground with them. And next slide. And this is the extent of where that mapping is being done in the top end at the moment by about, I don't know, 10 people or so over North Australia conducting fine scale mapping, big team at NAFI. So that's how we measure ecosystem services at the fine scale. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sofia, and I'm going to be talking about fine-scale habitat mapping and ecological threshold analysis, which is something I've been doing for the past years in collaboration with WWF, Parks Australia, and several Aboriginal corporations. So the aim of this work is to produce a map showing the geographic location of areas with similar vegetation composition, landform, and other ecological attributes. So things like grasslands, wetlands, and forests. To then measure and monitor fire management outcomes to support biodiversity conservation. So this map here shows the location of the study areas that include 6 Indigenous protected areas and 3 national parks, and that all registered savanna burning projects. For this presentation, I'm just going to focus on Kakadu National Park, which is the area in light blue in the map. So this is an example of habitat mapping, the big map there. It is produced using a combination of remote sensing imagery, spatial modeling, and field surveys. So we start by dividing the area into broad land types, so things like floodplains, lowlands, stone country, and water. And we then further subdivide those areas into the 25 habitat classes that I have listed there. These classes were identified in collaboration with Kakadu staff based on what they consider important for their land management. So the big map is our habitat map. Now I'm going to move into the ecological threshold analysis, which is a method that identifies habitats at risk of irreversible change or biodiversity loss, usually by burning too much. This method uses the habitat mapping that I've just talked about, and also the burn area mapping that Jay mentioned before, as inputs, along with habitat-specific thresholds that are derived from previous research from our group. So the models that inform these thresholds are from fieldwork, more than 15 years of fieldwork in Kakadu National Park, based on how plants and animals respond to different fire regimes. Understanding where these thresholds are being exceeded across the landscape provides critical insight into adapting fire management strategy. So this is just an example of the type of results we can get with this analysis for one threshold. There's several thresholds, so I'm just going to choose one that tells us then less than 10% of eucalypt woodlands should be affected by 2 or more late dry season fires. So these are the fires that occur between August and December over a 5-year period. So we can produce maps like this that show in green areas where the thresholds have been achieved and in yellow to red where they have not been achieved. We can also look at the trend in the threshold along the years by looking at graphs like this. So the blue line represents the percentage of the habitat affected. This dashed line here at the bottom is our 10% target threshold. If that blue line is below the 10%, in the green area, the threshold has been met. But if it's above, it hasn't been met. So we can see in this example that between 1990 and 2024, there has been an improvement in the threshold, and it has been achieved at the end of 2022. Finally, all this information is going to be brought together on an online dashboard, making it easy for land managers to access, track progress, and plan their future fire management activities. Thank you.
So I talked a moment before about NAFI and how important NAFI is as an operational product right across North Australia. A lot of the work we do is with the data that come from NAFI, and one of the products that we have developed is this thing called SMRF, the Savannah Monitoring and Evaluation Reporting Framework. It came out of work that was done by colleagues with the Kimberley Land Council more than 10 years ago, developing monitoring and evaluation reporting, and we were doing it very manually, so we decided to build this product. It's got a range of fire metrics, fire frequency, late dry season fire frequency, etc., and some graphs that display the data in a slightly different way for people to interrogate the bars and everything. It's all written in JavaScript, so you can just hover a mouse over any of those bars and see the values of the numbers, etc. And there's these set of filters here, so you can get right down to a property level, and it can be a park, it can be a bioregion. There's a whole lot of different areas that you can interrogate these data and work out what's happening on your bit of land. A project we've been working with Parks and Wildlife in the Northern Territory for a number of years now is this idea of getting those habitat maps like Sofia talked about, and clustering them based on how they are affected by fire. So generally you have these 3 classes we've come up with, and it's been a lot of workshopping. So you might have a different opinion, but there's been a lot of minds going to this. Basically you've got fire tolerant, so it's the savanna woodlands. You're not going to burn the crap out of them, but you know you can burn them frequently and with low intensity fires. And they're usually sort of the areas that you use to protect other areas like your fire sensitive and fire tolerant communities. So there's been a big body of work going into that to develop this. And that's applied using a whole bunch of metrics, again, going through a process of looking at the literature, most of which we've developed from fire plots in Kakadu and Nipmuc and Litchfield, but also people's local knowledge. And with that, we apply these fire metrics that you can see. So here's an example of Nipmuc and how it's changed through time on the right there. So the green are the early dry season burns. You can see they're very strategically placed throughout the park, you know, to mitigate the movement of wildfire, etc. And that's taken many years of studying these kinds of maps, etc., and working out where best place to burn. And you can see that a lot of those big red patches, wildfires that have started, probably lightning driven, have been contained as part of that. And next one, please. And then this is a dashboard we've developed with Parks and Wildlife, clustering those habitats into these fire communities, fire response communities, and then developing a bunch of metrics and analysing that year in, year out to tell the park or the various parks how they've been travelling. And they rely pretty heavily on those data. What does it carry? They're like, up us in February, please get us the data so we can make our plans for this year. So it's become a pretty significant tool for them and their fire management plan. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Cameron Yates. I'm going to talk a bit more about savanna burning methodologies. I think it's important that we all know that all of the burning in savannas is actually reported in the national accounts. There's a sector analysis done by the Commonwealth and the NGGI, the NIGI, and savanna burning falls in the land use change and forestry section of the National Greenhouse Inventory. It's very, very important. It actually gave us an opportunity to benefit because it is actually in the national accounts, so you can actually account and look at change. So there's been numerous methodologies, and methodologies changed through time. The original methodology came out in 2012-13. It was a program that took 10 years to develop, essentially, and it involved CSIRO, Bushfires NT, NALSMA, and numerous Indigenous groups. It was a large collaboration to develop the first emissions abatement methodology. It only ran from above 1,000 mil rainfall, so it was basically the top end, included the Kimberley, Cape York, but above 1,000 mils. It was an empirical model. It was all data driven. In 2015, a new methodology came out that extended the original methodology down to 600 mil rainfall. And so it was essentially exactly the same methodology. It just had a larger extent, taking it down to 600 mils. Then in 2018, there was another methodology developed by CSIRO. It was a process model, and it introduced coarse woody sequestration in coarse woody debris. There's a few issues associated with that, and now we have a new methodology coming out that is actually going to account for the living tree biomass as well. This is a huge step forward because the opportunity in the living trees is about 2 to 3-fold of what the abatement potential is. So it opens up a very large opportunity. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to put it and fit it into full CAM, which is the national accounts. And so there's a few issues associated with that as well, which I'll talk about. Next slide. Just so people have an understanding, before the original methodology, these are the types of fire regimes in the 2004 prior. The red there is late dry season fires. The green is early dry season fires. So the major issue that occurred pre-methodology was there wasn't the resources to actively manage the landscape. The landscape was managed at that time primarily by Bushfires NT, pastoralists, Indigenous people that actually didn't have the resources to go out and do anything. Since the methodology, you can actually get payment to reduce emissions, and so there's been a lot of resources go into North Australia where people can now actually actively manage the landscape. They can reduce the area burnt and change the seasonality to an early dry season dominated landscape. Obviously, early dry season fires have a lot smaller emissions profile, roughly half the emissions profile than late dry season fires, and it obviously has ecological impacts as well. Next slide. So our group has spent a lot of time recently trying to fix some of the issues that pop up with the process-driven models. A lot of the process-driven models are derived from data across all of Australia and aren't necessarily accounting for particular savanna phenomena, wet season, dry season, seasonal impact. And so we've done a lot of work looking at seasonal decomposition of litter, because the way the process models work is we're finding things that aren't ecologically sensible, things like less fuel in the late dry season than the early dry season, seasonal fuel accumulation. Andrew's been looking at fire severity. At the moment, the savanna burning methodologies look at a cutoff. As was said before, 1st of August is the start of the late dry season. Prior to that is the early dry season. We have a whole lot of metrics associated with fuel consumption in those. It's not just season, but it's low, moderate and high. So you do get high severity fires in the early dry season, low severity fires in the late dry season, but it's just all average. If we can actually map fire severity, it'll improve drastically. And we've also been working on extending the outreach of the program at the moment. At the moment, it's purely just a number of vegetation fuel classes within those regions. We're adding fuel classes like the Pindan, and we're also making it larger as well, going into the Tanami in what we're calling the Northern Arid Zone. All of this work has been published, but I'd like to say one important thing is we need to know and look at these models, see where the gaps are, and start collecting data to fill the gaps in the knowledge. A lot of this work isn't funded, and it's just small projects that we've taken the opportunity to do. For example, the seasonal decomposition, we had plots just out here in Berry Springs, at another work colleagues in Howard Springs, just to collect data to fill gaps. Not funded, where we can, we just need to collect as much information as we can to fill gaps in knowledge. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hari. So today I'm going to be talking about the ongoing work that we've been doing with collaboration with NISMA, which is the nature repair market methods in the 5.7 ecosystems of Northern Australia. So we all know that Northern Australia is globally significant as they store a huge amount of carbon and biodiversity, but they are one of the most fire-affected ecosystems on the earth. But for thousands of years, indigenous traditional managers have been maintaining this ecosystem, but the post-colonization changes in fire regimes has sort of disrupted this balance. So recently, in 2023, the Australian government enacted the nature repair market scheme, which sort of provides economic incentives for using ecological outcomes. So this work is in the very early stages of start. So we start by using identifying vegetation types. We'll be using the Paul and Boxberg method category, and then we'll be refining them using the fire ecology of these ecosystems. Here you can see sort of a proposed or very preliminary list of ecosystems that we'll be working with. And we will be using, as Sofia said, the ecosystem threshold sort of approach to do this work. So here, that's an example of an ecosystem threshold from Kakadu, which already Sofia talked about. So ecosystem threshold is sort of a powerful tool to define ecosystem conditions. Instead of vague categories like bad and poor ecosystems, they actually identify sort of the condition of ecosystem, and we can identify where the line is crossed, where fire frequency or severity actually triggers rapid declines in biodiversity or ecosystem structure. So here, basically, it's a tripping point, identifying the tripping points, which is points beyond biodiversity or ecological functions start to decline. So this is an example from Wildfire, a work done by Jay and Jeremy a couple of years ago. So I don't even have to explain this. So if you look at the first two, you can see they are far from the threshold or close to threshold, but after 2016, you can see they are fast approaching the threshold, which is the start of fire management programs in Wildfire. And interestingly, the recent analysis by Sofia and Jay again showed that these two ecosystems are actually approaching threshold or already in threshold. So it's a good way to measure ecosystem conditions, and maybe we could use that for nature repair market methodology and sort of analyze credits. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Hafsa. I'll be sharing an overview of my research project. So that it's bushfire emission evaluating the impact on air quality and human health in the Northern Territory. So bushfires are a regular part of Australia's savanna and tropical as a ecosystem. So, but their intensity and the frequency raised serious environmental and health concern. Therefore, the aim of this study is to investigate the influence of bushfire activity on air quality and human health. So to do this, I have combined several datasets such as rain patterns, active fires, particulate matters, and health records. I have 4 objectives. So the first objective is to analyze the particulate matter PM2.5 concentration using air quality data. And the second objective is to map the location and the duration of bushfire by using active fires and fire scars data. The third objective is to the meteorological factors, especially the wind direction, how it's contributing to bushfire smoke dispersion. And finally, I have also investigated how local population are affected by wildfire smoke by assessing the cardiovascular and the respiratory representation from Catherine Hospital. Next. So my methodology involved data collection and the analyzing of it. So first I have started air quality data, which is PM2.5 concentration. PM2.5, it's a teeny particle that present in the smoke, which is very dangerous for human health, because when we penetrate through the air and it reaches deep to our lung and causes breathing and cardiovascular problems in human health. And the second is meteorological data is derived from Bureau of Meteorology and anti-EPA. And I have also gathered fire activity data, such as active fires, fire scars from North Australian fire information. And this will give information about the duration, timing of bushfires. And the health record is collected from Catherine Hospital to focusing on the respiratory and the cardiovascular disease during the bushfire with a lag of 5 days, bushfire day and following 4 days. Finally, the census data is derived from Australian Bureau of Statistics to understand the population distribution and demographic context in the study area. Meta-analysis involves statistical modeling, spatial analysis, trend evaluation to examine the relationship between bushfire-induced air pollution and changes in atmospheric conditions. So, wind direction is also incorporated to this model to examine how the wind influence the dispersion and concentration of pollution. So wind direction can also say like whether the smoke is in local or it can move beyond the far region, or it has effect in spreading the smoke from one area to another. So by integrating fire activity data with air quality measurement to examine the correlation between bushfire occurrence and the degradation of air quality. Finally, the hospital presentation records are also analyzed to identify the trends, whether is it increased during the bushfire events or the poor air quality or not. The next. These are my preliminary results in terms of seasonal patterns. So in air quality and the burnt area. So we can see that from the wet to dry season, the air quality degrades as there are only 43 events, the 43 accidents during the wet season, but it reached to the maximum at 108 events during late dry season. We can notice the same pattern in terms of burned area as well. So from wet season to late dry season, the burned area is increased and it reached to the 101 to 644 hectares during the dry season. And okay, so let's come into the health side of the study. So in terms of indigenous hospital attendance, we can see that in Catherine, there are 34% indigenous people living. And from them, only 9% presented hospital during the time of bushfire. And about the non-indigenous people, so the highest percentage is 66% non-indigenous people lives in Catherine, and only 3% get affected during the bushfire. So in terms of age group, we can see that the young people's age from 18 to 13 that are the major share of Catherine population, and which is 36%, and only 2% presented in the hospital. Finally, we can see that the people over 65 years, the older people, they have similar number of people in Catherine, and it goes to like 11% presented hospital during the bushfire events. So overall, we can see that the older people are more vulnerable to the smoke, as they have presented more in the hospital during the bushfire times. So this is wrap up my presentation, and I'll invite the next speaker.
Until that's the last one. That's me. We've been running at super speed. It's even not 10:45.
So you have 15 minutes.
Yes. So I work as an ecological economist, which means that I try to bring the social, economic, and ecological perspectives together. The work that group has been doing for so long. And I've been fortunate to join DCBR back in 2014 as the first time as a formerly ecological economist to start work on ecosystem services. Because as you heard from the group, that carbon economy took off around 2012 formally. So the whole process started from the federal level with incentivizing fire management in the north. So I started looking at that fire management delivers so many benefits, not just ecological benefits, but to many of us sitting here, that we have a healthy landscape. We get so many social, cultural benefits living in this beautiful landscape. So I tried to look at the value of ecosystem services, but before that, we did some challenging work on looking at the pastoral land use as well. So highlighting the cost of externalities of pastoral land use. A lot of this work has informed the policy work that I've been talking a little bit about here. So some of the earlier work was looking at how can we value ecosystem services from that finely, beautifully managed landscape based on fire management in the north. So we looked at the projects that's in the north, the whole team, almost many of us worked on this project. So we looked at what is the value of ecosystem services that get delivered from managing those projects, which are highlighted up here. And then that figure comes quite kind of unrealistic. It's huge, but it's not unrealistic. I shouldn't say that. It tells us what it is that lies behind when we manage these landscapes really beautifully. But we looked at then the meaningful benefits in terms of Aboriginal people working on their country, managing country in terms of fire at this stage, but that also delivers them many social cultural benefits in living safely in their communities, having healthy lifestyle, having your opportunity to learn on country. So when we looked at these well-being benefits for people, which we call meaningful benefits, they accounted for about $200 million a year. So that's a huge figure that helped us to inform some policy decision-making in that space. And with that, we also came up with this framework, which we call two-way framework. This was in response to some of the global frameworks that has been put out by the UN in Millennium Assessment, as well as in IPBES assessment, that's usually one direction. What we were trying to say in this is based on our experience working with indigenous peoples is that it's two-way. If we will manage the landscape, we'll get the ecosystem services. And within ecosystem services globally, it's embedded that you will get the services from the system. There is no, because it comes from mainstream population, there is no reciprocity linked in that space. So that's what we wanted to bring in that framework, that people's well-being and the state of ecosystems, they're two-way. If we are managing the system, we are getting the ecosystem services, otherwise we won't get them. And one of the things that inform my work quite a lot in this space and very unique, I think there are not many people working in this space, is highlighting the importance of indigenous capabilities and giving them a bit economic lens. So if people got the opportunity to utilize their capabilities, their skills and knowledge, then that opportunity can help them to develop, to convert into economic employment, the development that they want. So the government's responsibility in this case is to develop those suitable opportunities as they have done for many of us. The same way the governments can do it for indigenous peoples when they're working on country.
admin@throughputlhr.com or leave a message here with your full name, how many people, what time and where you're staying. Also a contact number or email so we can get back to you with confirmation. Thanks. Bye.
You're fine?
We are fine.
Okay. So yes, so we try to put that policy argument that if we got the right opportunities for people to work on their country, then we can enhance people's well-being, which is closing the gap, linking all those social aspects together. I can take more time.
No.
So, that we have done is that if the government instead of spending on indigenous welfare, we propose that if that money could be invested for people to look after their country, the governments can save somewhere about $4 to $18 billion a year. So you can look into this paper as Andrew and others are saying, I need to rush. And our opinion is that there is huge land area throughout Australia where indigenous peoples have got interest, they got skills, and also many of them are living there permanently. So it's an economic rationale that it delivers benefits to many of us, not just living within that landscape, to support and incentivize this. And a lot of this work came from a visionary person, I think it was Richard Thornton from Bushfires, Bushfires NT has a CRC at that time when I started with Jeremy and with the team. We started looking at payment for ecosystem services at that time. So now this agenda is at the forefront in the federal government, developing nature fair market, which Hari has already talked about, and indigenous parties are integral to the success of that nature fair market. So what we are trying to do under that nature fair market is to develop the framework that can help indigenous stakeholders, indigenous land managers actually to participate in that nature fair market on their own terms, having their own framework that they can say, we want to report about our country in our way. So we have developed a social cultural indicators framework that I probably don't have the paper is published, you can look into that one. And taking further that journey of bringing indigenous perspectives to the forefront, we are now kind of trying to tackle a bit of policy issues in that space because a lot of private companies, as they have done for carbon, they are mushrooming to take the benefit, to take the typical approach a market does for any product. And that doesn't suit the natural landscapes. That's the big thing that we are having a fight with or having a big challenge to deal with because our policy mechanisms at this stage, they're set up in a typical economic framework that we can treat these things as any other commodity in the market. But the natural ecosystem services, the natural systems, they cannot be treated as a marketable product. So our argument is if we really efficiently want to have nature fair markets and we want to conserve nature as well as enhance people's well-being, we should be looking at the policy settings that support indigenous people and that enables them through this kind of investment model. So where governments can set up a common trust model, like a platform, a central platform where people can come and seek legal advice because it's public money. It's you and I, for the taxpayer money that goes into nature fair or carbon farming, bucket. So all of us are contributing. What we are trying to say is if the governments really efficiently want to support this and achieve conservation outcomes, we should be having a centralized platform where people can come and consult and have a free, informed advice from the experts, and then they can invest with or choose what company they want to sell their biodiversity credits or carbon credits. So we, in Australia, we do not have any of that mechanism at this stage. It's left to the free market kind of approach, but looking at the global examples, those kind of approaches have failed in a number of ways. There are many countries who have implemented this kind of approach, having a centralized system like Costa Rica, Mexico, and the same way Australia can push that way. So we have been working in collaboration with some key indigenous leaders in the space to push this, that we need to change the policy settings in which we want to operate the nature fair market in the future. So that's where I end. Any questions? I would like to invite my team to the front so we can get a photo done. Shy, just but this would be a good time for us to get a photo together.
Or any questions?
Just
That's all there.
You want to get up there? Come on. Come on, Jeremy, don't be shy. Anyone else? Okay.
Thanks, Sam. Come on.
So does anyone have any questions? Anyone in the audience? Or online? Do we have any online questions, Zach? Not yet. But please, we actually finished a little earlier than I thought, so we have more time for questions.
Yeah, questions over there, Steve. Oh, he was.
I just wonder for the carbon sink, which was accumulated by early season burning instead of late season burning. What's the major form? That's more like the charcoal, which is more sustainable, or just a bit more biomass that incorporated into the soil?
So at this stage, it's more biomass. So it's tree biomass essentially, which is increasing through time. And yeah, the way the model works is projects have to run for at least 25 years, and it's a model projection through time of increasing woody biomass essentially.
So the accumulation of this woody biomass in the future, would that be possible to become another risk of the big fires?
Possibly, but if the landscape's managed at a scale that's appropriate, then no, it won't be. So if we can remove the hot, late dry season fires that are landscape size fires, then no, it shouldn't be a risk. But yes, if you increase fuels, you increase risk. But if you have better breaks and better management, well, the risk is mitigated.
Questions from online from Oscar. Can the presenters speculate on where they see this space around 2050 in 25 years' time?
Okay.
this will be in 25 years.
So I didn't follow the question.
Well, I really hope that there's opportunities for proper investment in North Australia through improved management. You know, the savannas are one of the most intact biomes we have in Australia. It's less disturbed than many other landscapes. So if we can inject some resources into North Australia and actively manage it in a better way, then I really see there's opportunity for North Australia. If you look at other industries in North Australia, I don't think they're sustainable long term. Whereas we do have fairly intact habitats and they are worth maintaining, and I think that's where we can make a difference.
It's probably for Kamal, I think. So if you've got the nature repair market and then also the Australian carbon credit scheme, how do those different schemes interact? And if you were like a land manager or in this group, how would you know which to go for? Or do you go for both? I'm kind
Exactly.
of confused.
It's causing a lot of confusion for land managers. At this stage, they can both kind of work together. But to me, then tomorrow we'll be looking at water market, and then you'll be looking at something else. So how many markets we can get? So the kind of approach that Australia has taken at this stage is like one ecosystem service, you can trade it in the market, which is like carbon, and then biodiversity is another service that you can trade. But you can also stack these services, like if carbon is a major service that the land managers may be kind of trading in the market, then biodiversity can be stacked on the top of that, which means that that will get less benefit compared to the actual value that you get for carbon. So that's kind of a stacking approach. But you can also go for a bundled approach, which Costa Rica and some other countries have gone, who have successfully implemented, relatively successfully implemented these kind of markets for the last 40 years or so. So there is a lot to learn in that space. At this stage, we are just going one here. So the typical, market approach, which it shouldn't be the way when we deal with natural systems. We should be actually looking at holistic management of country. And that's what is coming from the indigenous land managers, because they are not looking at one piece at a time. They're looking at whole health of country. So, and that includes people as well. So the kind of framework that we developed, it has got two domains. One is country and people. The other is country and people and country and culture. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
People.
something, there are two domains. So it brings together that people, culture, and country, that it's everything linked. So if the culture is strong, then people can look after their country, they know their practices, and then they can be healthy. So that means the cycle, the framework that we propose, that two-way linking, so that works nicely. So there'll be another 20 years or so to move there, but I think eventually things will move in that direction because other countries are moving in that direction.
There is a policy setting there as well in terms of with a lot of these projects, you're not allowed to do it if it's core business or I've got a requirement to do it. But that's just a policy setting, and that can easily be changed in terms of, why shouldn't people get multiple benefit for the same action they're undertaking? If they're improving many pools, why not get the benefit of multiple pools?
But it has to be proven that, all right? So we have to have some way of recording that.
Yes.
Demonstrate.
Yeah. So under the savanna burning methodologies, there's actually a requirement to undertake active fire management. So you can't have a project and then just do absolutely nothing and then reap the benefit of your neighbours doing work. There's actually a requirement for you to undertake some form of management action, and that's how you get around those things.
So there are two different ways of approaches when we look at how the governments can invest. One is this input-based model, where you look at what kind of management you're undertaking and the cost of that management, and then the government or the agencies, whoever is dealing in that market, they will support, incentivize, or pay money for the amount of those efforts plus some buffer. But the other one is that it can be done based on the output, which we are doing for carbon market. So because it's more the amount of carbon credits that you can sell in the market, so you'll get the credits. So that's one approach. But then incentivizing the inputs is one approach. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, with the carbon credits, you've got a whole methodology. What are they going to do with the nature market? Like, how do you measure biodiversity? Is it vegetation? Is it you can do water survey? How do you measure that?
We've been sort of handed an interesting proposition to build a nature repair process that's compatible with the savanna burning carbon method, but focusing on the complementary biodiversity approaches. So you take the Australian government has invested very heavily in infrastructure around reporting tools and things. We'll be using those sorts of frameworks, using the types of vegetation / habitat categories that they use in the carbon market approach, but adding all these other biodiversity assets which were purposefully excluded from the carbon one. And you would be able to claim on the one project site credits, for example, in the Armand Escarpment, and you go and have a fire management component that's focused on white-throated grass rings, and you've set up criteria around that, you'd be able to get credit for that, which would be quite additional to what you're trying to do at a carbon project scale, which is at very large coarse scale management. The problem comes really, though, there are lots of, even though we recognise that North Australia is in pretty good condition, there's plenty of places where there's already been irreversible change. And if you take sort of the Melaleuca invaded woodlands of Cape York and that places, there's no fire management's going to do anything there anymore. So we have to exclude those areas. The only way to go to get those grasslands back is nasty herbicides and bulldozers, and it's not a fire project. So when you're dealing with sorts of the woody thickening issues, the invasions of grasslands, we're not going to necessarily be able to use these types of market-based approaches to address them. And yeah, it's a bit of an interesting challenge to go down this route, because as our Indigenous colleagues keep on pointing out, you go and do one thing for fire management and you get these benefits, but at the same time, then that might increase brader grass or whatever in the landscape, but interactions with buffaloes and things. Realistically, you need to be doing things in bundles, not piecemeal approaches, as Kamal has rightly put. But our wise masters in Canberra don't seem to understand those sorts of complexity, because they're realistically focused on the very degraded habitats of southeastern and southwestern Australia, where it's essential to try to get some sort of habitat connectivity and things happening. They don't know about North Australia. It's irrelevant. Sorry, it's long-winded. I could have answered your question, but the sorts of challenges we're given.
Any other questions from anyone in the room or online?
I think there's a little more. Oh, sorry, you go.
Okay. Maybe more of a comment or part of the question. So, because the nature of repair market is about repairing, it doesn't really incorporate maintenance, does it? So, yeah. And with the carbon accounting of farming, if the opportunity arises to enter the nature repair market with biodiversity, will that be in retrospect? Because obviously, introducing good fire management to landscapes is going to benefit biodiversity. So, can you measure that in retrospect? Maybe.
That's a can of worms.
Yeah.
There's big arguments at the moment around sequestration in terms of backdating sequestration. There's huge arguments around it. It makes sense. But yeah, there's huge arguments around it.
So only last week that the Australian government signalled that they were going to potentially use nature repair credits as offsets. So that's unsurprising they're going to go that route, but that has a whole new sort of dimension to what the nature repair market may or may not be.
Then they might not.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, people have been implementing programs to improve fire management for many years now. It'd be good if those efforts could be recognised for their other benefits.
Yes.
I think that's an argument.
And one of the big arguments for backdating as well is, so if you look at a lot of the Arnhem Land projects, they've now been running or some of them since 2012, and your project will go for 25 years. So all of the sequestration benefit is already been reached in the way the models work. So if they signed on for sequestration, they'd be signing on for a liability because all the benefits been reached, and the only thing is it could go down. So unless they can get the resources to maintain it into the future, and that's the argument.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they have no option. They can't participate at all because they're just signing on for a risk.
What are the arguments against?
You can't backdate and pay for something that's already happened. So no other carbon methodology in the carbon farming initiative allows for backdating. And so that's the argument. People are saying the work's been done, you can't backdate. But in this case, there's a difference. Yeah.
If they backdated, it'd be hundreds of millions of dollars of credits.
Yeah.
It's literally.
Yeah. And also the overall approach is fixing the problem. We are not incentivizing who's looking after it, looking after the landscape well. It's those who have caused the problem.
I was going to say the bigger issue for the sequestration methodology is we are talking big sums, and so then people will start looking at, and the integrity of the methodology, it has to be squeaky clean because there will be a lot of eyes on it, and unless it's bulletproof, there'll be all sorts of issues.
So this question's online from John Altman. Great set of presentations that show the power of multidisciplinary, but poverty rates in remote Indigenous communities are increasing and the social fabric is struggling. So how can community engagement in these opportunities be fast-tracked? How can this, sorry, it's a long one, but it's a great one. How can this reach be communicated to policy community in Darwin, in Canberra? The comms surely needs to improve. I've noticed we talk more about emissions avoidance and reduction that people can understand they're struggling. Yeah, that's the log.
Okay, I think in response to that, well, what are you doing, John? And you know, you're in a very key position to be able to advocate.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Jeremy?
With Canberra, thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was told to type the question rather than speak, but look, I just think that we've sort of, you know, this research has been around for a long time, and it's really important and powerful, but it just, the message just doesn't seem to be getting through. That's my concern. And you know, you look at data from 2016 to 2021 census, there's been reference to the ABS, and it shows Indigenous poverty rates are going up. And so I wonder, how do we, you know, I struggle with this issue of how do we, you know, get policymakers in Darwin and Canberra to realise that the conservation economy is what, you know, Indigenous land's about, rather than, and you see this very much in the Northern Territory, continuing with looking for mainstream solutions that won't work for these remote situations. And I do wonder, you know, I just think that you guys up in Darwin don't realise how poorly understood this is down south. People just do not understand, you know, the benefits, both in terms of, you know, carbon emission reductions and, you know, the obvious value of sequestration, as well as biodiversity benefits from this work. And it just seems to be beyond the understanding just of the general public. You know, it's so difficult to get the messages through. So I wonder, you know, how do we communicate this better?
It's a good question, John, and I think we grapple with it collectively all the time. And you know, it's fundamental that across the north there is just so few electorates. Now we are irrelevant on the national perception, and we come up with any good solutions about a big show and tell down in Canberra, and we could work our way collectively to do something like that.
I think it'd be very useful. I just think that, you know, the nature of this presentation, you know, and I hope that, you know, the slides can be made available, is extraordinarily powerful. You know, you shouldn't underestimate how a set of, you know, short presentations, you know, maybe they can be meshed a little bit better for policymakers, but it's a very powerful set of recommendations. I really congratulate you.
I think the issue is what Jeremy said there. So that a lot of Indigenous lobby groups have a lot of contact with federal ministers continually, and I think the federal ministers understand the issues, but you know, we're irrelevant. Nobody cares about North Australia. We've got 2 seats in the territory. You know, North Queensland's one. I think the Kimberley's one. So I think there is, you know, there is a big effort being put by a lot of the Indigenous organisations to make traction in Canberra, but they just don't get anywhere.
But I think that Southeast Australia does care, particularly if you look at the shift of the, you know, intergenerational shift and the way that that's changing the way people vote. I think perhaps it's not necessarily about us selling it to government down there, but us selling it to the voters down there, because I think that there's a much more open mind about this type of scenario as a way that the country should operate. And if I may just follow up with a question, with the economic outputs,
Have you done anything, or has anyone done anything comparing your sort of traditional Western capitalist type of investment with this? Because it seems to me that territory government and the people that are making those business investment decisions are very much entrenched into that way of thinking. And I think this is too far. I mean, Jeremy, you mentioned something about it before, quite a long way out of their realm of understanding or comfort. That has anyone or in any other country done that sort of comparison?
I can give you an explicit example, right? That we were contracted through the Bushfires and Natural Hazard CRC for a project very generously funded by, come up on out, the guy who actually ran it, Richard Thornton, really did care about Northern Australia. No one else in the emergency management in Australia really cared, but Richard Thornton made sure we got investment. And our whole approach was to show that if you actually empowered Indigenous ranger groups to be sort of frontline respondents and do a lot, assist with a lot of the planning, and utilise that sort of framework. You actually look at the distribution of those ranger groups across Northern Australia, and if you actually costed out the benefits of just employing a couple of people and giving them the necessary material, you could actually show that it would be much cheaper to fund that than would be to respond increasingly to floods down the Daly Way.
Yeah, just to add to that, like a place like Daly River gets flooded almost every year, every 7 years. So we highlighted in that paper the cost of that and the cost of involving Indigenous people from local communities in managing their emergency situations. They said our policy setting doesn't allow us. And that was work done with government, but and then our question was that who made the policy settings, you know?
Okay, we could talk about this for hours, I'm sure, but unfortunately, we are out of time.
So we're at the Darwin Centre for Bushfire Research. We sit down there in Pinkgate. We've got a pretty good coffee machine and a lovely veranda.
Oh yeah, I know.
So please come down and have a coffee anytime.
I really want to thank all the speakers for coming here today. For all the people who joined us in the room and as well as online. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But I just want to remind you, this is actually the last seminar of 2025. It's hard to believe.
Fun.
We will be back in 2026. I don't know exactly when, February, March timeframe, but watch this channel. You'll get all the information you need, and we'll see you back here next year. And as a reminder, also, we have a morning tea over Yellow too, which you're all invited to.